when Marvin asked me to come and talk to you all, he said, I want you to talk about some emerging trends and how that might affect smaller businesses. And I said, the problem that I have with emerging trends is they're visionary and they're big, and we tend to look at them from 50,000 feet. And my experience with smaller businesses is, frankly, many of them, these trends are off your radar. You know? And so I said, well, what if I came in and we just sort of had a discussion? What kind of things do you see that you believe will affect your business or challenge your business in the next couple of years? I can talk about, trends that I see, but again, I'd rather have it be a more value-based kind of discussion, because if I start talking about trends in technology, which Ross talked about, specifically BIM, but if I talk about trends, you might sit there and go, I don't really care. So let's talk about things that you might care about. So I want to open this up to you. Tell me some of the things that you see that are going to challenge your business, trends that you see, you're aware of, you've read about, that are going to challenge your business in the next couple of years. And we'll try to talk about a few of those things today. And then hopefully, as I shared with Marvin, maybe we can collaborate on doing some things that address some of those concerns and help maybe educate you so that you're better off, your businesses are better off. So, we have microphones, we have people. Marvin said you're all just waiting to talk. Please tell me your name too, so because some of you I don't know.
Good morning, my name's Joe Davis with Custom Engineering. My concern is as I try to grow my business, where am I going to find the people? And if you hire some kids out of school, statistically, about 3-4 years they get a little antsy and they move on. So now I made this investment in them only to lose them. And then there just isn't a lot of people floating around. The labor market is going to start tightening as we get busier. So just the labor, supply of labor of engineers and technical people, I see a challenge in the coming years.
Workforce development, just a show of hands. Serious issue for you all? Okay. What else? That's not the only issue.
Yeah, Manny Silva, I'm with National Glass and Glazing.
Hi, Manny.
What I see happening is a shifting of risk to the subcontractors, especially over the last year plus. So we were seeing well-developed designs for the purpose of bidding, and those designs are becoming less well-developed. And I think that's part of, probably related to projects are starting to come on board, and there's not enough time for, the customers expecting them faster. So less developed designs are coming to us now. We're actually expected to bid and put a price on those. And so they may be in design development, pre-construction drawings, maybe 30 to 50%, and they're expecting a hard bid. So that's one of the trends I'm seeing, and I read that as a shift of risk to the subcontractor.
Okay. Show of hands. Everybody's facing that, issues? What else? What other issues? You don't want me to start talking because I'm used to talking in 3-hour increments in class. So we'll never get out of here in time. I can promise you.
There's something that I'm seeing.
I'm sorry, your name is?
Marvin Johnson. Marvin Johnson. Something that I'm seeing from the owner side, and from a small business standpoint, I think it's going to challenge us in how we keep our books and whether or not we're accustomed to being transparent. Owners are going to these really fully integrated audit systems for their construction project, particularly the larger ones. And the language in the contract that would be, say, for an S.M. Wilson, provides for this preservation of data, and the owners right to audit certain things. And a lot of times, we aren't used to it getting down to that second tier subcontract level where someone's calling us saying the project is being audited and we need this particular data from you. We may not be accustomed to that. The trend that I'm seeing is that the owners are saying to both architects and their subconsultants and CMs to their first and second tiers is that you're responsible for preserving this data even at the lower tiered levels. So we need to be prepared. At some point, you're on a project, your cost may be audited.
So is that, let me rephrase that. Do you sense or feel concerned about having to produce that level of detail? Is that an issue? It will be. As soon as you're called to produce that data. Yeah, understood.
If you're successful on campus renewal, it's already
It's there. So that's not an emerging trend, that's here today. Okay.
Hello, I'm Kevin Swan. I think in spite of rates being low, I think we're going to continue to struggle with access to credit, access to capital, and the ability to manage the speed of cash flow throughout the duration of the project. As we're coming out of this recession, that access and the ability to juggle and manage cash flow could be a real linchpin to our success, particularly the smaller and emerging businesses.
I certainly would agree with that, wholeheartedly. What else? Just yell it out if you want.
Yeah, I can yell. I'm Daisha Betts with the Energy Team, and I really have more of a statement than a question.
Okay.
I'm hearing a lot of issues about workforce, and I don't know if you all are aware, but the state of Missouri has a lot of funds available for on-the-job training. There's a program called Workforce Ready Missouri, where they'll pay your potential employee up to $20 an hour for 6 weeks at no cost to you. And then thereafter, up to a period of 6 months, half of their salary can be reimbursed to the employer. So that may take away some of the investment piece of bringing on new talent.
Great.
Right, they do have to be unemployed or receiving. I mean, there's some strategic, things that are available. But most of the individuals that are coming out of college, or some things of that nature, I mean, you still may be able to get great talent through that talent pool.
Awesome.
I'm Carolyn Green from Professional Environmental Engineers, and my biggest concern is the race to the bottom, where owners or project leaders want the lowest prices and it almost takes away your ability to do value adds. And we can't necessarily compete with somebody who's coming in as a loss leader.
Agree? Okay, good.
I'm Michael Kennedy Jr. What I'm seeing and what we've been adjusting to is, I think a lot of the firms in here have historically worked where there's been state and local government opportunities, and where there was guaranteed percentages and opportunities to get in. But as we see the world opening up, where the private sector has made it a mandate that they would like to see diversity, the BJC, who's been the leader in it in the private side, but then you see Monsanto starting to open up, and some of the others and around the country, honestly, where they're open to diversity. The problem is that it's still okay. We're open, we want it, but it's got to be at the exact same prices and quality and everything, and that's the adjustment people need to make. So I think the shift in the thought process that the firms are taking to where when you want that higher quality for a lower dollar and you don't have the buying power, and you have to start thinking outside the box. So how do I think outside the box? How do I partner? Who do I team with? Or what our industry as a whole has not done is really looked at the benchmarking of other corporations outside of the construction industry. And that being said, looking at mergers and acquisitions, looking at aligning and vertically integrating services, looking at how do we share overhead. That's that driving. It's, you know, I'm a company, you know, you have a company that might have 20 employees competing with a company with 200 employees. Well, that small company still needs an accountant, still needs marketing people, still needs all these services where your buying power, your overhead costs might be higher, your rates. So until you start putting all of those pieces together, you're not going to be able to compete because, you know, essentially, unless that owner says, I really want this, you know, then you're going to be in a troubled spot, not being able to provide, you know, a Bentley for the price of a Ford. And that's what they want today, and especially on the private sector side. So until you can figure that out, you're going to be at a loss getting in. The door's open. It's wide open. And it's more so now than ever. They want it. If you can deliver, they'll give it to you. You just have to, you're going to have to think outside the box and figure out how to get your overhead lower to compete.
I'm a non-traditional academic, which, as I tell my colleagues at WashU, means I worked for a living. But, you know, you see less and less people coming into the trades. And I think there's a whole lot of reasons for that. In part, we live in a society where essentially you're almost viewed as a failure if you haven't graduated from college. And so, you know, people that traditionally sort of went from high school into the trades aren't doing that anymore. So I think we have some issues with how to make the skilled trades more attractive to younger people, to, you know, incentivize them to move in that direction, for sure. But again, that's a big societal kind of problem, and we're not going to solve that immediately, although I think awareness is the starting point. A couple other trends that were mentioned that I think, you know, I can comment on briefly this morning. Kind of that pressure to deliver design and construction in a shorter period of time. When I get the chance to talk to owners, one of the things that I tell them is do whatever you can to maximize the time that is spent in design / pre-construction. Because as Ross pointed out earlier, you know, we get one opportunity. In my classes, I talk about everything in pre-construction is our opportunity to build the job on paper. Ross will tell you it's now to build the job on this, not paper. But the premise of that argument is, you know, we get a chance to figure out what's problematic, and we get the chance to solve those problems and work through them. And the technology helps do that. It's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes with technology. People think that, you know, because we have this, we can produce faster. You know, but I'll tell you right now, real design and real constructability review and analysis is something that happens up here, not on this machine. And so spending the time to sort of get it right, or as right as we can get it, when we're in that planning, design, constructability phase of a project, pays dividends to every owner. It also allows the integration. And one of the things that I see, and I don't really want to classify this as an emerging trend, because I think it's here, and yet I think it's going to become more important as we move forward. And that really is the concept of integration. You know, when I started a long time ago, in the construction business, we were all very siloed. You know, designers design something and they'd kind of throw it out of their silo, and the 4, 5, 6 contractors that were going to bid on the work would get that and do their thing, and somebody gets low and somebody gets the job, and, you know, we move on. today it's much more integrated, in part driven by technology, but also in part driven by a more integrated philosophy. I contend, and when I talk to owners and survey owners, you know, their expectation for a project is that, well, everybody's integrated. It's a project-centric delivery. They don't understand why we have these adversarial relationships, which really are the foundation of the history that we're coming from. The delivery systems that we traditionally have used, design, bid, build, are in and of themselves adversarial based. You know, at the minute, I always say, you know, design, bid, build project, the minute you get the job, everybody's happy we're all on the same page. Then the next day, the first conflict arises and people are pointing fingers and things like that. So owners are starting to say, you gotta deliver this in a way that's project-centric. How do we do that? Well, we integrate. We start talking to people earlier and get different perspectives, whether that's from a constructability review or a schedule review, doesn't matter. We're much more integrated. One of the things that really means is that we all have to now look at ourselves, whatever business you're in, you need to look at yourself as a professional service provider. Contractors don't just deliver a piece of the project or the project itself, but it's in that delivery, it's in that process that the real value is realized. What differentiates contractors, and again, the old model was really a commodity-based model, that low bid. Low bid implies that we're selecting from a group of people whom we believe are all equal. And so, doesn't really matter who gets the job. Experienced buyers realize that that's not true. It does matter because it's in the process, it's in the delivery where you recognize value. So, if we're going to be more integrated, we're going to have to develop relationships. We're going to have to view ourselves as a professional service provider, not, well, we're just here as a commodity to build this building or this piece of the building. So the relationship piece is going to be, I think, a trend, if I can sort of correct what I said earlier about it not being a trend. It's a trend that's going to continue. People and businesses who are going to be successful, one of the changes that they're going to adopt is, you know, how do I build these relationships where I can add value? And from a business development perspective, you know, most of us were kind of taught a bottom-up approach. The reality, and the bottom-up approach, I mean, is really sort of a, you know, we're going to sell our technical skills and abilities. And the reality is that it's tough to differentiate between company A and company B on the basis of technological skills, because we all have them. And, you know, as Ross pointed out from his survey, you know, different companies are using them at different levels and in different ways, but it really isn't a differentiator. What becomes the differentiator and what clients want and what people want are to develop sort of relationships that are more equal to that of a business advisor, a trusted business advisor, so that when the construction partners are gathered, their advice, right, is held in the same esteem as an attorney or a CPA or other business advisors. So we've got to find a way to bridge, I think, the old models of not only design and construction, but post-construction, because that's part of the BIM model too. And that's where we're going. That's where we are. It's a question of, you know, how we're going to adopt some of those things. Again, you know, one of the things that I see that businesses have to do is figure out how they're going to create value And I think from an owner perspective, owners need to move away from the traditional delivery systems. When I talk about delivery systems, I tell every owner essentially the same thing. It is, selecting a delivery system is not a purchasing decision. It is not a purchasing decision. Sometimes large organizations get into this sort of supply chain management kind of, we'll push this off to the purchasing agents in our organization. The reality is a delivery system really is more of a project execution strategy. And so it becomes a different measuring stick as we decide what project delivery system to use. So I tell owners to open up, just because you've always done it this way, expand that field of view. Go through a process to make decisions. Go through a process to bring people in. Quality-based selection, that's going to become much more of a norm than it is today. So I think being prepared for those kind of things are really kind of the areas that you as emerging businesses, and I asked Marvin, I said, so who am I talking to? What's the audience, right? And he gave me a description. And I really don't, Frank will attest to this, I really don't like the labels, minority-owned, women-owned. I think sometimes that pigeonholes people. I would rather look at a firm and say, here's an emerging business. These guys are getting started now. How do we support that? But as emerging businesses, I think for you, the challenge is, and Michael touched on it, you've got to have all these resources available. And how do you integrate that with other companies? Who do you partner with? That's all relationship-based. It's all relationship-based. As a PSP, professional service provider, we have to focus on the value that we can create. And I think there's plenty of ways to do that today. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that everything I said isn't easy. We're talking about changing cultures, going from that commodity to something else. But we start to see that on a big picture. And again, as an academic, I tend to look at trends from that 50,000-foot view. We look at them nationally, and at Washington University, I look at them globally. What's happening in other countries? So I have this huge sort of almost from space view of some of this stuff. Here in St. Louis, I look at what's happening in our communities. I look at Ferguson as an opportunity. My students all know that I frequently say in the midst of crisis, there's opportunity. In the midst of all of these things that we see as setback, there's opportunity. And I think that fair-minded, critical thinking people always are willing to be empathetic and to look to helping other people. The other issue, and where's Marvin? Oh, there he is. Yeah? 5 minutes. Wow. The other issue that I want to touch on is risk, and this will be my final little point. One of the things that I find with emerging businesses, when I talk to folks like you, sometimes you'll say, well, I don't get a chance because I'm small, I'm new, I'm this, I'm that. And I think you have to reframe that. Really, what it gets down to is risk. And the perception of how risky that engagement, partnership, contract is going to be. The reality is, when all things are equal, So when you're competitive on price and you're competitive on schedule and you've got the resources to be able to deliver, it gets down to a subjective measuring stick, risk. And I tell my students this, it doesn't matter if you're going out trying to get hired as an employee or your firm is going out trying to get hired as a firm to provide professional services. That same analysis, and it is in many cases very subjective, that same analysis holds true. That people make decisions based on risk. And oftentimes, they're making that decision to hire somebody from the perspective of what is the safest choice? Whom is the least risky? So one of the things in terms of building relationship that you have to do is create the perception that diminishes risk, so it becomes much easier for people to engage you, your firm, and your services. Any questions in the seconds I have left? It's been, oh yeah.
Can you define emerging a little more specifically? Because I would say I'm not emerging if my company's been in business for 17 years. I'm not emerging.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems. So when I look at it, I look at it from a variety of criteria. I would say that certainly time is an element of that. I would also say that volume is an element of that. If you're a small business and you've been a small business for 17 years, for example, I could contend that you're probably still emerging if, in fact, you're trying to grow that business to something that is larger or even much larger than where you are right now. You're still emerging. That's a process. I think the problem is defining that. It's much easier to define somebody as a minority or as a woman than it is to define them as an emerging business, which is probably why we haven't really adopted that as a standard in the industry. Like I have students, and in my program, you know, we're part-time evenings, so I have a lot of working professionals. And I have people that are like close to my age who are pursuing a master's degree in construction management. I sort of see them as young, quote unquote, because of their experience. They might have been an estimator for, 20 years. So they have this sort of narrow view of the industry. And so broadening that becomes, they're young in their experience in some respects. Very experienced in one area, but not in others. So I think a lot of those factors can play into defining what emerging is. Sandra?
Speak to that, because I know one of the things that, as firms in the warehouse, and I also get this a lot of times from firms that are in the BJC toolbox. As a matter of fact, I got an email the other day where someone in the toolbox said, please remove me from the BJC 101 sessions because I don't need those sessions. I'm already in the toolbox. And what I tried to explain to them is that as it relates to this new journey on campus renewal and the new journey that BJC is taking on, to them, all of the firms in here are emerging at BJC. You could be established in the market, but if you have not yet reached, in your opinion, where you could say, because really if you look at kind of how these life cycles go, your introduction, and then you're in your growth or emerging, and then you get to a certain point where you're kind of mature, and then either you reinvent yourself or you're headed down. So what I challenge each of you to think about is, as it relates to BJC, who are you? Do you work across all BJC campuses? Are you trusted by all of the BJC toolbox firms? Have you worked with all the firms in the BJC toolbox? Have you interacted with all of the BJC project managers? And if you then look at it that way, you can say, I've got a whole lot of opportunity I haven't hit yet. That's what it looks like for me. I'm saying, gosh, we've only touched the tip here of BJC. But I wanted to make sure you all saw that. For us, because I've sent things out sometimes, the warehouse list, and I'll get calls and people say, Sandra, you have on here I'm emerging. I say emerging at BJC, right? So you're right. You define it based on what your particular context is. So
And that's a great point, I think. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.